Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Allan McKay Podcast. My name is Michael Janda, and we have a tremendous guest here with us today on the 300th episode of the Allan McKay Podcast. We have none other than Allan McKay himself. Allan, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. Let me give a little background about Allan before we dig in. So Allan is a visual effects supervisor. He's actually a thought leader in the VFX industry. He has this podcast, which has 300 episodes in the bank with this one. He does tutorials. He has a big YouTube channel. He speaks at conferences all over the world. He's worked on some amazing projects for Industrial Light and Magic, Ubisoft, Paramount, Blur, Activision, Microsoft, Warner Brothers. He has worked with directors like Michael Bay, Tim Miller, Robert Zemeckis, M. Night Shyamalan, and then on some of the projects that all of the nerd lovers like me love in the world, things like Transformers, Avengers, Star Trek, Game of Thrones, Call of Duty, Halo, Destiny, BioShock, down the list of amazing things. And he's also an Emmy winner for Super Bowl 39, right, Allan?
Mm-hmm.
Super Bowl 39, the visual effects Emmy winner for that project that he did, which is now like 16 years ago. Crazy to think.
2005.
Yeah, crazy. So we're excited to have you on our show, the Allan McKay Podcast. Allan, why don't you give us maybe a couple minutes of background on how we ended up doing this show together here today?
So first of all, I think you do way better than I do. Yeah, I mean, God, I don't know. I reached out to you like a long time ago because I think I saw something that you and Chris Do had a video on Instagram or something. And it's weird. Like, I feel like most people don't really talk about career. And also when they do, it's just the most generic stuff. And
yeah,
I take pride in this because I feel like strategy is everything. And most people are just more looking for immediate results. And just hearing you and Chris kind of riff on, I'm just like, holy shit, like right away it just resonated. And yeah, I just had to reach out and be like, love your stuff. And we ended up doing a podcast together.
Yeah.
Which I just remember I was one of your bobbleheads that you have on your desk there because I was just like nodding with everything that you're saying.
I just shake the desk a little and I get them rocking. It's like this subtle positive affirmation makes people think, oh, this sounds right to me because the bobbleheads are nodding along.
That's right. It's a compliance test. Make everyone comply. Yeah. And, you know, obviously then we did a follow-up when you launched BizBuds with Tom. So that was a lot of fun too. But yeah, I mean, just in general, it's more, if anything, it's more, I think, our personal relationship when we have time to talk. But you're obviously friends with my wife, Christina, as well.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, it's just a good circle of good people.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that.
Man, isn't it so great? This creative community online blows my mind all the time. So I have a big audience on Instagram. You have a big audience on YouTube. You have Instagram followers as well. And you've got your email list. And so you have these deep connections with thousands and thousands of people. And I have the same. And I pinch myself every day at how blessed I feel to have connections with these people all over the world, this creative community of good-hearted people who are just trying to do good work and run a good business and be good to their clients and give back to others in the community. I'm blown away all the time when I get to connect with people like you who have that mentality. It's so rewarding. I think it's a really unique thing industry-wise, what this creative community is in this global market that we're in right now.
If you think about it, like you've got, you're probably going to be offended because I'll probably get it wrong, but last time I checked, it's like 150K followers on Instagram.
Yeah, 155. So
I looked up my old town. I was born in this really tiny town in Australia called Nambour, which is the first time I ever said that out loud because it's embarrassing. But
people in America, we think Australia is cool no matter where it is. Well, whatever city it is.
Yeah, like it's just kind of funny because I looked up like the population it would have had when I lived there, and it was 10,000 people.
Yeah.
And so when you think of 15 times that, you know, like, but not only that, okay, so now you've got a town of 150,000 people.
Yeah.
But all of them, first of all, know who you are.
Yeah.
And secondly, like they're all passionate about what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
You know, you've created this kind of ecosystem of people who love, you know, what you love, and you're all aligned to a degree with like the same goals, the same things. Like, I think it's so amazing.
Yeah, it blows me away too. I think about that because now the 155,000 people, when I watch a sporting event and they say, hey, the crowd capacity is 90,000 people, and it's just a sea of people, I always think, man, that's not even all of them that I've been able to connect with. So it's really, it's a humbling thing, and it makes me really grateful. And I'm sure you feel the same way, that you've got such a great listenership on your podcast,
100%.
an active audience. You know, as long as we don't let that go to our head and make us think that it's because we're something, then it's great. We always have to remember that it's because we're providing value back to them in some facet of their life. And that's where the engagement or that community comes from.
Yeah, it's how can I serve them?
Yeah.
How can I solve their problems, you know?
Yep.
So
good. All right. Well, I've got a list of questions to pick your brain on. Being raised in Australia, and the second week of your freshman year, you dropped out of high school. And then you never went back to school again after that. Is that true?
Yeah. I think I thought that I would, but then there was a turning point where after like a year and a half, I'm like, I guess I'm not going back. So, yeah.
Okay. So you completely blow off school and secondary education. You didn't go to college or anything like that either. So how did you get from there to LA? And I don't want you to go through the entire story because I know you've given that before, but give me like 3 tipping points in that journey where you're just sowing your wild oats in Australia with this dream of someday doing movie stuff and moving to LA. This is the dream you had. What were the big tipping point moments that got you there?
I haven't thought about it this way ever before, but I'll say like attraction and repel. So I think in the beginning, when I did have that realization that I'm not going back, that's when, having grown up originally in a small town, and my grandma, you know, mentioning some people I knew in school who were older than me were, you know, losers, they're high school dropouts, that made me not want to self-identify with being a loser myself. So as soon as I made that conscious decision that I'm not going back, it meant that I need to make something of myself. I don't want to be a high school dropout loser like that had kind of been bred into me. So that kind of repelled me away from that. And I think at the same time, having just not that long before that, kind of discovered like I like video games, but I also got into 3D. So I love the idea of like, one day I could go work at ILM or whatever. And the key thing here is that my mom never told me I couldn't do anything. She never was, you know, if I had big aspirations, she didn't say, oh, you can't do that, which is a double-edged sword, because it means that in a lot of ways, it's not teaching me to think realistically. It's just like, oh, anything's possible. But at the same time, it meant that I could think big without someone kind of beating that down, you know? So having set bigger goals, of I want to go work in Hollywood, obviously got a lot of resistance from other people. But I think the key thing for me was just I decided to build a strategy, which I think just recently I was reading a book by Todd Herman about this, and he mentioned target mapping, which I've never heard before, but I guess that's essentially what it is, where you're deconstructing a goal backwards. And that's what I did. I basically said, okay, I'm here. I want to work in Hollywood. What can I leverage? Okay, I got nothing except for passion. And just kind of went after it. And I think that there were definitely setbacks, but I think that's where perseverance comes in. And this is what we chatted about right before we started, was that I really admire people who don't give up, because the whole point is to fail and fail and fail, but you're failing up. And most people look at it like avoid failure, so don't even try in the first place. So I think it's this pig-headed discipline and having that bigger dream of going after something that it is meant build the strategy to get there. And as long as you have a strategy, you just got to follow the recipe. Yeah.
Okay. So I like this target mapping idea. And you mentioned your mom, or your parents. What did they say when you dropped out of high school? If they said you can accomplish anything you want, that's the mindset. You can do whatever you want to choose to do in life, but then you go and drop out of high school. What was the resistance side of that from your parents?
So I only had my mom. It was always my mom and I, and like we pretty much grew up on food stamps. Like I mentioned again just before this about having like a party with 80 people in a 800 square foot place. Like we literally lived in like my room I'm in right now was bigger than our apartment. So you know, I was paying rent from like 14 onwards, and yes, I mean, I think for me the main thing was that what I regret is I never really had much discipline growing up. And it sounds so weird to identify that, but I definitely felt like I wish I had someone to discipline me, just to kind of set some boundaries, to push me, things like that. So I'm grateful because she never limited or restricted me. But at the same time, like maybe I do need someone to kick my ass occasionally and be like, hey, get your shit together, you know?
Yeah.
So I think if anything, she just kind of gave me the freedom to figure out what I was doing, because I think she was still on her own journey of figuring out what she's doing too. So there wasn't really any reaction. It was just kind of like floating. You know, I'm going about what I'm doing and she's going about what she's doing. So it's good and bad with that, I think.
That's interesting. Okay, so one of my best buddies in life, he was a wayward high school kid. This is one of kind of my blood brother people in my life. You know, we've been friends for 20 years and just have that. You know, you meet some people and you have this super deep connection for some reason. He's one of those people. Anyway, so he had this wayward high school years and was dropping out of school and all this stuff. And his dad was a Tennessee farmer and just, you know, super work ethic, blue collar, this is the way it's done kind of person, forced him to finish high school and stuff. Anyway, one time he told him, and I love this little message. He said to him, life will teach you the lessons you refuse to learn from me. That was what his thing was. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like the greatest parenting paradigm I've ever heard in my life. We go and we try and teach our children the life lessons that we want them to know. But if they don't learn it from us, life is going to teach it to them. It sounds like your mom probably had some of this mindset of, okay, Allan, well, good luck to you, but life's going to teach you what you're not learning from me and my example. And you said she was on her own journey at the time too. So anyway, so what were some of those life lessons when you are living on food stamps that somehow got you to where you are today? What were these? I like to say that life will hit us across the face sometimes. We'll get blows across the chin that make us say, what am I doing here? What do I want out of life? What were some of those moments in your life experience that made you say, I want more for myself?
It's kind of hard to say, like kind of hard to go back there. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff that even just now, like being almost 40, only just now starting to like really open up to my wife even about like growing up. But like we grew up in a really violent area, and I lived in like, this sounds so, you know, one of those typical origin stories. I grew up in a crack house in the ghetto, and which sounds so weird, but it's actually like, no, like, fuck, that's actually pretty much my life.
Pretty true.
That's what I mean. Like, just to make the short version of this, but like my mom, I think like she had me very young, and I think she was still trying to figure out, and I think still is trying to figure out her life. So I don't blame her for anything, but she definitely, I think, made some decisions that kind of put us in awkward situations. So we lived in a house with like 12 other people. I think some of them were doing heroin. I didn't know half the people we lived with. The house next to us had, I think, 16 people living in there. There's a lot of violence on our street, including people coming into our house with guns and a lot of random shit. And it's really, I keep thinking like one day I'm going to tell the story, but every time I do, I just feel like it sounds like a pity party. But there's a lot of really bad shit in a certain part of my growing up. And I don't know, I think in a lot of ways, like just that, and also not really having necessarily a parental figure, it kind of meant that I'd kind of just disappear for days or weeks at times with my friends and kind of just do whatever I wanted to do. And when I did hang out with my mom, it would be with other adults. So it kind of meant that I kind of grew up with other adults as friends. So I think in general, it just kind of meant that I'm out there to fend for myself. And I think not being a parent yet, but I do feel like there's a lot to letting kids kind of have that independence rather than perhaps babying people for too long later in life, where you don't let them do anything themselves, because I do think that it allows you to make those choices, and also life will definitely teach you a lot of those lessons that you need to learn too. So I think in general, there's a lot of rough stuff that I never really took as being a bad thing. It was just more like that's life. But when I relay the stuff just now that I'm starting to finally open up about it to my wife, she's just like horrified at like half the stuff I tell her. But experiencing a lot of stuff earlier on, it just kind of prepares you a bit more for later. So that way, most things you experience aren't going to knock you down as much as they would otherwise. You're going to go through hard times, and if you go through them later in life, you're going to be less prepared for them. But if you experience them earlier on, I think it helps you be better prepared for later in life. And that's what I feel like. It's about 4 years of my life where that kind of was a big thing. And, I think in a lot of ways it kind of helped me be more mentally prepared. So that way I could go off, I could work at a younger age, as well as travel and do a lot more. I'd say the one big valuable lesson I had as well is just having not much money. It meant that I bought my first computer. By selling my artwork to do that. And just in general, if I ever wanted anything, it meant that I had to go get it myself. It wasn't, I always envied my friends who would have the big house, or they'd have the computer in their bedroom. Whereas with me, it's just like I would buy the 5 or 10-year-old crappy PC because that's what I could afford through hustling and bugging people on a bus, like buy my artwork, or my friends' parents. And I think that was a really valuable lesson. It's just like, you can get anything you want in life, but you got to get it yourself. You can't expect handouts. And that really kind of helped, I think, a lot too.
Yeah, it's such a great lesson, and kudos to you for figuring it out and doing it, from growing up the way that you did to actually going and conquering the mountain you set out to conquer. Because, we live in a world now where there's a lot of entitlement and a lot of expected handouts and things. And the truth is that we all get to craft the life that we choose for ourselves. And you're either going to wake up 20 years from now or 30 years from now having achieved specific things that you set out to achieve, or you're going to wake up 20 or 30 years from now and just have spun your wheels going from this job to that job and have nothing historic to show for it other than you survived the 20 or 30 years. And kudos to you for actually coming up where you did and setting a vision of what you wanted, and then actually going and making it happen through your own hustle and grind. It says a lot about you and your character, for sure.
But that's also where later in life you attract other people who have that similar story. And that's what I love, is like hanging out with you or other people. Like, we've all got those grand visions, and I think most people don't dare to dream. And I feel like most things are achievable. You just got to figure out the strategy and then be willing to see it through. And that's what most people are so impatient about. They're like, no, I want immediate results, not, okay, measure where I was a year ago from today. That's a huge leap, instead of like panicking about, well, I want everything tomorrow and what's the shortcuts, instead of enduring it all.
Yeah, people look at the tight window. They think, oh, I'm not getting anywhere, because they're comparing themselves today with themselves yesterday or the day before.
100%.
The better thing is to go expand the horizon a bit and look at yourself a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. If you look at yourself 20 years ago versus today, the progress in your life is just astronomical, almost beyond what anybody would even have the passion to dream about. You've from where you came from to where you are now. Yeah.
Priorities as well. Like, just because you mentioned that, and I think of me 20 years ago, what was it, 2021? So I mean, like me, I think I was 19 or something at the time. So I think we all back then might have these big priorities of what we want to do. And that's the thing too, is that over time, you're going to shift your priorities. You're going to get to certain areas and be like, like for me, I want to be doing visual effects, all this stuff. Like me now, I don't want to be on the box. I want to be doing all the other stuff. But that's the thing too, is over time, like you'll shift. And that's why having like a good vision of where you want to go isn't, I must accomplish this thing or I'm a failure. It's more, that's my general direction. And then as you go, you start to say, well, now that I've gotten to here, I'm starting to see things better. The 30,000 foot view, I can start to say this direction would be more fun, or this one, So yeah.
This is super interesting. Your journey is super interesting. Tell me about when you finally packed your bags and went to LA. What was that process? Were you already doing visual effects stuff on your home computer, learning what you could, and you just decided, all right, time to go for it, and you fly to LA and find a place to live? What
Totally.
was that
I hopped on the bus and I got to Hollywood and I'm like, where do I go to be famous?
Yeah,
And,
it's the dream.
So I think I was applying for jobs in the US when I was 14, 15. And actually, the first job I ever applied for was for Ritual Games in Texas. And they offered me the job, but I couldn't get a visa because I was so young. But I got offered a job at Team Fortress Software, which got bought by Valve Software like immediately after. So I ended up working on Half-Life, which became the biggest game in 96 or 97. It was just funny that I worked on the biggest game ever. I'm like, okay, my career is set. And then I ended up having like a year and a half of like no jobs whatsoever, which is just funny to see that dip. And that kind of taught me a valuable lesson too, that like, just because you work on some big stuff doesn't mean that you're set for life.
You made it. Yeah.
But so it's kind of funny. I did that as a gag. I just kind of applied to see what would happen. It was like the first job I ever applied for when I felt like I was ready and actually got offers, and that was really cool. But then still there was definitely a lot of rejection after that, oddly enough. But then when I was 19, I felt like, okay, I've got a really cool reel now. I've been in the industry for a while, and I decided to send my reel to Blizzard and Blur Studio again as a gag. And 6 months later, I got a rejection letter from Blizzard. It only took him 10 years later to contact me and ask me to run one of their departments a long time later. But Blur reached out. It was actually Tim Miller reached out to me personally and said, I love your work, and do you want to come work for us? And that at the time was my dream job. Unfortunately, I still couldn't get a visa. We tried. But the cool thing, and this I think was such a valuable lesson, is I stayed in contact. Most people would be like, oh, okay, I'll email him again when I got in, down the line when I'm ready or something. But every 3 months, I would just send a non-harassy email, just showing some of my latest stuff, just stay in contact. And it meant that fast forward 4 years or something, when I did move to LA, it didn't mean like, who are you? Oh yeah, I spoke to you one time 4 years ago. It was, you've got the job. Like, he was hiring a lot of my friends just because I recommended them. We had that personal relationship, and I've always tried to keep that relationship with him. And I've tried to mimic that because I feel like, it's like a muscle. You got to keep working it. Otherwise, you let, your relationships fade, and both personal and professional. So that was a huge game changer. But finally with LA, the funny thing is, like, having my mind set on LA for so long, I think this is the theme now. As a gag, when I was 21, I remember one afternoon I was running the first ever Toyota Scion commercial, which was premiering in front of The Matrix 2 that was coming out like 2 weeks from then. I sent an email to a studio that was posting saying we need someone for a show in LA. And I got a call that afternoon, and they're like, can you be in LA next week? And I think I was turning 21 actually by then. So I was turning 21 that week. So I had a party in Sydney, party in Brisbane, then I flew out to LA, did 3 months. And the last thing I mentioned, just because I think this is valuable for everyone, is when I went to LA, I did a 3-month stint on a job. But rather than just doing that and going back to Australia, like the whole time I was there, I was just going to every studio, meeting people, having lunches, having dinners, just creating as many relationships as I could, just because I'm like, hey, I'm finally in the bubble where everyone else is. Don't waste the opportunity. But it meant that when it came time to leave, I had, a lot of offers on the table. And it meant that I went back, waited for my actual visa to go through. And then, I moved out there 6 months later, and stayed out there for a long time.
What year was that?
That was 2003.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's super interesting. Okay. So you were working in the start in the video game industry more than the movie industry, right? Mm-hmm. What was the first movie gig that you landed? And when were you independent? Were you independent? I know a lot of Hollywood, for editors and things and visual effects, it's contract based. You get contracted for this project. It runs for 3 months, 6 months, a year, and then you're off the project and you're looking for your next gig. Has that been most of your career, or were you ever employed
I think I've only had 3 staff jobs in my entire life, and I'm kind of curious to see what your thoughts are on that too. I've always liked freelance because I always saw a full-time job as opportunity cost, and it's going to be different for everyone. But like, I've missed out on The Matrix, Lord of the Rings, like all these other like really big films because, unfortunately, I just accepted the sequel to Inspector Gadget or something crap, that I'll regret for the rest of my life. So the first feature we did was in Australia. It was a kind of wannabe Under Siege 2, which already sounds terrible. But it was
because Under Siege 1 left something to be desired. So
I tried to watch it again the other day.
No.
It's cheesy, but it's not good either. But 2 I will never see again. That's but I'd done a couple of features in Australia that like by the time I moved to the States. But then I remember I worked on a game cinematic, which is why I went to LA in the first place. But then I worked on Cinderella Story, which has got Hilary Duff. That was just like a quick 2-week gig, more to kind of build that relationship, test the waters with the studio I was going to go work for. And I still remember the owner of the studio, who's now one of the execs at Disney. He came up to me and he's like, "Hey, Allan," and he took me outside. He's like, "Would you be interested in originally heading it up, the visual effects for Blade 3?"
Okay.
And at the time, that was like my dream job. So I just remember being like, I think I can do that. And just inside, I'm just like,
I'll work it in.
Yeah. And unfortunately, my visa took so long that, I came on like halfway through rather than like being there at the very beginning. But, in a lot of ways, that like I remember the night that I arrived in LA, I already knew everyone at that point. So I just popped in the studio. It was nighttime. We're having some beers, but just seeing, all the footage of Blade and, all that stuff was just like, holy shit, like this is so cool. And so I think in a lot of ways to me, that was like a huge privilege to be a part of like something that's not a great film, but it was definitely, my type of work at the time.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I got a handful of questions that are more industry related. And this is from me not having a full understanding of the process that you go through. I worked at Fox Studios. I was a creative director at Fox Studios. I ended there in 2002. So it was like right before you moved to LA, I was moving away from LA to where we live now in Salt Lake City. And
did you ever go to the Nakatomi Plaza?
Oh, I worked in the Nakatomi Plaza.
I was curious.
I was on the 21st floor of the Nakatomi Plaza, overlooking Beverly Hills, right next to the Fox studio. That was my office, man. It was sick. It was like, pinch me. Is this real kind of feeling?
I love that area too. I'll quickly just say that my balcony in Santa Monica, I was always grateful that I could, knowing that I'd seen the movie Die Hard so many times growing up. Looking over my balcony, I could always see the Fox headquarters there. Yeah. But what I didn't realize for about 5 years was I took a photo one time and I zoomed in and I realized there was a slight D there in like right behind. I realized that if I didn't have the Nakatomi Plaza there, I would have the Hollywood sign. So it's like, which one?
You live now in Portland and I live in Salt Lake City. And this maybe is a little testament to the brutality of living in Los Angeles, that it is awesome and it builds great connections, but it's a tough place to live long term. I don't know why you moved away from there, but why did you move away from there?
I think most people will see it as like, okay, like it's great, I love it, but for me, it's quality of life. Like, I've lived in enough places that, to me, moving to LA is just like, I love it. To me, it's my home at this point, but at the same time, I know that it's not like, it's overpopulated. Yeah. California is expensive. It's, dirty. I mean, for me, like moving to Portland, like, there's just trees everywhere. It's beautiful. I just came up here because I wanted to film and also still be close to LA, Vancouver. But yeah, it's just quality of life, really.
Yeah. Which I think it was the same for me. Same for me. My wife has extended family out here, and it was quality of life. I started thinking when I started freelancing in LA, and I didn't need to live there anymore to commute on the 405 every day. I started thinking, man, what is life all about here? Why do I need to live here with this cost of living and this level of congestion when I'm an hour and a half flight from Salt Lake City to LA? And I kept all my clients. I was doing all my work came out of LA in the early years. And then we started to get into some of the other markets, but it was everything out of LA at the start. So I hear you. So you've done a lot of cool movies, a lot of cool games. What is your favorite VFX shot that you ever did?
Shot. God, God, I don't have a favorite one, but I think working on Flight, because if you were to say my favorite project, I'd probably say God of War or Avengers or something. But I
Okay.
think working on Flight, there's a big, like the whole movie's about an airplane crash, and
Yeah.
I think being a part of that with Zemeckis, but also the team, like working with Kevin Bailey, who's been on the podcast before. Yeah, just I think that I was just really fond of the people, and something I was telling to someone the other day is like Kevin and I had a great relationship where we really understood each other enough that it meant that, you know, we could go down a rabbit hole with something and say like, okay, like creatively we've now figured out the solution to this, but we've also made this convoluted, version 53 of something. Let's just start over from scratch, get the same results that took us 2 weeks, we'll get it in a day, kind of thing. And there's just like a lot of calls that I think if it was different people, you'd probably get offended or argue about something or whatever. With us, we're just 100% aligned all the time. And even at the very end, me and also the head compositor, Wei, our job was like, let's just make as many elements for the plane crash as we can. And Kevin's job was to take them all away. In other words, to balance it all. And I love that where, again, like some people would be kind of fighting on that, like, why did you take my stuff away? But we knew the conversation where it's just like, we're going to make it as cool as we can, and he's going to make it as real as it can be. And that sort of stuff I just love when you get with the right people that, you just work together.
A little different paradigm from Transformers, where you make it as cool as you can by adding everything, and then you keep everything in the final shot.
Right? Oddly, that was the same team of people, but you're right. Like it was dial it up rather than dial it down.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So that shot in Flight was the plane crash shot, right?
Yeah.
Super cool. Okay. So I have this perception that comes from a little clip that I saw George Lucas in filming of the prequels, where it was super micromanaged, and he was sitting in their preview room with a laser pointer, and he's like pointing at each of the little clones or each of the little robots, the Roger Rogers that are in there, and he's like, oh, this one, let's kill this one off stage. Yeah, whatever they're called. Yeah. So he's pointing at each little one and saying, oh, let's just have him fall down just a little sooner, and let's have him die off screen, and let's have this one not get shot. He's just like micromanaging every single little detail of it. And I'm sure that there are projects like that where the director is that involved. What is the normal for you when you're doing Flight with Robert Zemeckis? What's his involvement in your process in that film?
Yeah. First of all, George Lucas, it's funny because it's not that scene, but there was one in the making of that I was talking with a few of my friends who worked in Phantom Menace about their whole experience in editorial. Because I'd never seen someone in editorial say like, I like his performance on this take, I like his performance on this take, when they're like, and trying to like splice them together. Just the micromanaging was just on a whole other level with that. So Zemeckis was pretty laid back. In fact, contractually, I think this was with Paramount that contractually we had to deliver on a set date, but we wanted to keep adding more to the shots. So, with the plane crash specifically. So I remember we delivered the shot or the sequence, and then we were like, hey, do you mind if we add some more, tweak it a little bit more? And that way we'd officially, hand it over. We don't get sued, but we could continue messing with it. The good thing is that Zemeckis and Kevin had this relationship forever, like for 10 years. So that meant that there's this really good synergy with them that worked out really well. I do remember at one point, one of Zemeckis' people, because he's a pilot, he flies a lot. One of his people was like, hey, Bob, like that fuselage thing there is that on your plane? And he's like, no, it's not. Like, what's up with that? And then we'd have like a creative conversation about where the fuselage tank should be or whatever. And I'm just kind of like, you have your own jet, like F you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The fact that it's kind of casually just thrown in there. But I feel like you're right that there are going to be certain projects that Tim Miller I always call the original pixel fucker, because he'll zoom in and be like, I don't like this one pixel. So there's definitely that. But I think it's more about, like for me, I think more as a producer first and then an artist. So I'm always thinking about what are the right calls to make to get us 90% of the way there, rather than trying to just go crazy on everything. it's more about understanding the big picture of like, okay, do we want to deliver the show, or do we want to have that one little thing perfect and nothing delivered? And I think that that's also the secret with clients, which you've got a lot of experience with, obviously, where it's more about them understanding, like making them feel heard, but also understanding or kind of re-educating them on the priorities. So it's like, okay, we can absolutely do that. Let's get these things done. And then we can worry about the fucking droids when we have a movie, rather than we got these droids hitting those beats and we have nothing else to show for it.
Yeah. So this, while you were talking, kind of made me think on some of these movies that I watch, and you know, some of them, the visual effects are so outstanding that you don't even know it's visual effects. And then other ones, you're like, what in the world were they thinking? Like the original release of Justice League. I haven't seen the reboot version, but the original release and Henry Cavill's Shrek face and all the stuff. And the special effects were so obvious and so poorly done. Is that, I assume, just a typical process of timing, that it has to get done, it has to deliver, and this is, we're just going to accept it how it is?
I just had the visual effects supervisor for Justice League on like 3 days ago, so I'm going to watch what I say here. But I was chatting with Weta, who did a lot of the facial animation for him. And the way I see it is like, there's that one shot that the movie starts with, which is terrible. And that was done by who knows what. Like some random studio did this one shot, and it kind of just sets the tone for the movie, where now you're looking at his mouth way more than you should.
You're hyper focused on it. Yeah.
Exactly. So the rest of the film, like there's something off, but it wouldn't be so obvious. But because that one was so badly done, that it kind of sets that tone. But with all the other stuff, you know, maybe it's more of a quantity over quality. Like I don't remember the original so much as this one, where they've done 2,600 new shots. Yeah. But, you know, I think it is kind of like, let's chase Marvel. Like I feel like a lot of the more recent DC films are literally, we want to do what Marvel does. And Marvel, it's kind of like Transformers. You get very desensitized to it. Like I remember dating a girl a while back. We're in New York, and we watched Transformers, and I remember nudging her saying, oh yeah, like that building blowing up, I did that. And then about a minute or two later, I'm like, wait, no, that's my, you know, I couldn't even recognize my own stuff because just buildings blowing up everywhere.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that when you can't even identify like your own contributions, it says like there's just too much going on, you know?
Yeah. Has it ruined movies for you, where you are watching it, now you're focusing on
I try to switch my brain off as much as I can. I care more about narrative. Like I'm the person who's like, quiet, I'm trying to, you know, get as much as I can. So I'm more interested in the writing and the directing. I think just more the experience these days of films more than anything. In terms of the visual effects, I really try to switch my brain off. I don't care so much about it. I've been doing this long enough that like VFX is paying the bills, but it's not like I'm trying to inspect every single thing or whatever. Yeah. But, you know, there's still a bit of that there for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. What's your favorite shot that somebody else has done, where you're just sitting there watching whatever it is, and you're like, oh man, that is the greatest shot I've ever seen. I love it so much.
I still go back to Jurassic Park, where knowing it's 1993 and knowing that hyped up VFX so much that everybody was doing terrible VFX for another 10 years after that, which is why we got such a bad rep. But I still look at almost every single shot. I feel like the Brontosaurus in the beginning, the textures are quite low resolution, so it doesn't hold up. But in general, the quality of like the T-Rex, you know, just you don't even notice the car he's chewing is actually a 3D rendered car. It's not a real, you know, SUV. So in a lot of ways, I kind of look at all those. I'm just still so appreciative of the level of detail that was going into such an archaic movie, you know, so long ago. Whereas now, you know, you're right. Like we take it for granted. It's kind of hard to really think of a particular VFX shot because it's everywhere and it's kind of expected now. But Mandalorian now is kind of impressing me that you don't even think about it. You just assume it's shot on location somewhere and it's all virtual sets in a real-time game engine for almost the entire show, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's really impressive. I always get impressed by those older special effects. And you know, we talked about Star Wars, but you go back to the Star Wars days before it was even computerized visual effects. The first couple Star Wars movies just insanely well done, considering the technology that they had to work with and what other people were producing at the time, which looked so unrealistic and so cheesy.
Yeah, it paved the way for everything, like both what they're doing with cameras and also post-processing, but also then visual effects. I also think like John Carpenter is just a phenomenal director, even though it's more sci-fi, but like the special effects, everything that, him composing all his own music, I think he's done a lot of really great films that have a lot of substance for what they are.
Yeah. I just watched Halloween yesterday with my 19-year-old son. Yeah. The first one, he had never seen it. And we had it recorded on our YouTube TV or something. I was like, okay, well, we got to watch this. Greatest horror soundtrack in the history of horror soundtracks. It still haunts me. My parents let me see it when I was like 7 years old or something crazy. I don't know what they were thinking, but the music for that has haunted me ever since. And it is so impressive when you see these creative people put their stamp on the world and change or create a genre like that. It's so amazing. George Lucas, John Carpenter, Alfred Hitchcock, you go down to these people that revolutionized the way that things were done. Steven Spielberg, obviously, some of these great ones. So good. Okay. What was one of your most epic failures in the history of your career where you thought, oh crap, what have I done here? I'm never going to work again because I blew this so badly.
God, I should know all this. I mean, I'll say this, which it doesn't sound very dramatic now, but like when I was 17, I took a job that I didn't want because it was on the other side of the country, and it was either that or move to Sydney for the job I did want. And I knew someone in Melbourne, so I went to Melbourne instead because I could stay on his couch. And the whole thing is a disaster. My heart wasn't in the job as well. I had to learn softomage, which was not fun. So I ended up getting fired. I was 17. I got fired from my job, and I also got kicked out of the house that I was staying at, both in the same day. And like that to me these days isn't a big failure, but it was a very traumatic one for me at the time. Just losing the place I was staying, not having money, and then like losing my job and everything. It just kind of like it. I feel like there's certain things that if they're taken away, whether it's a relationship, your home, your bank account, like there's certain foundations that we rely on. And so that definitely traumatized me a lot because I was homeless for a couple of days. I didn't have anywhere to stay. I didn't know how to get home. And so I'm constantly on the phone with my mom trying to negotiate with the airline because I had like a Christmas ticket that I was trying to get changed around. And so that kind of screwed me up a lot, but it also, I think, taught me a really valuable lesson where I never wanted to ever go back to that again. And because of that, it meant that I would never allow it to ever happen again. So it meant that every job, I never wanted to be surprised, like, hey, this isn't working out. So I'd always be checking in and seeing what I could be doing better, and just always knowing if there's something coming down the pipe that I'd have a chance to course correct it rather than just having it kind of thrown in my face at the last minute. So that to me is a big lesson. I've definitely had a lot of failures, but that's the one that comes to mind, is just because there was a lesson that allowed me to take control or retake control of the situation in future.
Yeah. That's a good lesson learned. I learned the same lessons in my journey. And I guess you touched on a couple things. One is those blows across the chin that we get in life, losing your job, losing your place to live, no money in the bank. Those are the blows across the chin that make you sit back and say, what do I want for my life? What am I doing wrong? How am I going to rectify this? Because I don't want this to be who I am. And then the next thing that you mentioned was the checking in with people, that customer service mindset that is so important in any service-based industry. And the unfortunate thing is that a lot of creative people, when things start getting tension in the project, they tend to just bury their head in the sand and like hope that it goes away, or I'll just keep working and then I'll deliver and I hope they like it, instead of having the courage to say, wait, something's feeling wonky here. Let's address it right now and not let it muster and build into this thing that's going to be so much bigger. I learned that lesson in the early days of my agency as well, that just constant communication with clients is so critical.
Well, you know this too about like being a manager. Like if you're not on the box doing the actual work, it's even more stressful for you because you're trying to get results from something that's kind of out of your control. And it's the same kind of empathy if you think of your client. Like if there's animosity there, it's not like there's anything they can do about it. So it's just going to continue to grow.
Fester, yeah.
And the thing is, if you address these things, it means that they're more comfortable coming to you with problems in the first place. And on top of that, like you can address like the problems before they become a bigger problem. And most of us, you're right, like we're just like, I'll just get the job done and then they'll be happy. But at that point, there's, a lot of resentment kind of built up. So I think in every case, whether it's personal relationships or professional, it's about diffusing problems before they become bigger problems.
Yeah. Don't let their unhappiness level get to 10.
Yeah.
When you could have diffused it or slowed it down at 3. Recovering from 10 back to 0 is nearly impossible, but stopping it or slowing it when it gets to unhappiness level 3, that's feasible. You can make that happen, but it's not going to happen if you just bury your head in the sand. Give me an experience when you said yes to something that you actually had no idea how you were going to execute, and then you were held over the fire by yourself to figure it out because you landed it.
So I'm one of those people, like if you say like, what have you worked on? I got to go to IMDb to actually look up like, what have I worked on? So I can't think of any specific thing. I will say that like that has definitely been a common thing where I feel like, to kind of jump around for a second, but all about writing copy, and it's about connecting with those people. And I feel like this is one where I assume other people have felt this, where if you really want to lean to a pain point, it's that feeling of realizing that like 3 weeks has gone by and you had all this time and now you're down to like the final day and you just wish you could have that time back and your face is numb with stress. And I've definitely experienced that so many times, and it's taught me the lesson of planning ahead. And I was just talking with that VFX supervisor actually from Justice League about this exact thing, that younger people tend to kind of just they're doing their own movie. They're not doing the movie that the director wants. And that tends to be a problem. You kind of go down a rabbit hole, and then at a certain point you realize like, oh crap, I'm out of time and I've got nothing to show for it, and you got to pull some miracles out of your butt. And if only I could have like a couple more days, like even 24 hours back. I've definitely had that a lot. That feeling is the worst feeling in the world, of just, I wish I could just have a little bit more time to get back to go down the right path instead of having a plan in the first place and sticking to it. But there is one shot on Transformers that I worked on that I wasn't meant to work on, and I originally accepted Transformers only if I could have a few days off on my 28th birthday to fly to New York to celebrate my birthday. And I was always expecting them. This is Kevin and Ryan over at Atomic when they ran that studio that I mentioned earlier. So at the time, I always expected them to renege and be like, oh, we're sorry, we can't. And I was always blown away that even though we're down to like the final week of delivery of the film or close to it, they were like, okay, have fun. And it blew me away because I never expected them to actually hold me to it. And I expected to have to fight for it. But I do remember I was at Gordon Ramsay's restaurant, Maze, in Soho, I think. And I was eating there and I texted them. It was late at night, had a lot to drink. And I was like, how's it all going? And they're like, yeah, really good. When you land, can you come straight to the studio? And I'm like, uh-oh. So I remember coming in that morning. This is in San Francisco. And they basically, there's one shot that I wasn't doing that someone else had been working on for a month. And it just creatively wasn't hitting the right marks that our client wanted. And they told me, like, we have 24 hours to deliver the shot. And if they don't like it, they're pulling the shot, which means they're going to lose like 50 grand. And this was something that someone else, like a very talented artist, had been working on for a long time. So I came in having to start the shot from scratch. And this is like a whole city being destroyed. And, you know, it's one of those fly-through shots in Transformers 3 where they're on, like, they're gliding down from a plane. And that was one of those things where it was impossible to do what they're asking me to do. And I felt zero stress going in, because for me to finish this, again, this is planning. Like for me to finish, I got to have my stuff done by 1 a.m. because it's going to take about 6 hours to simulate and render.
Yeah.
And then Wei, who I mentioned also earlier on Flight, he's the comp supervisor. He was going to be waiting around at about 4 or 5 a.m. to start bringing in my elements. So we kind of like figured out our plan. And it meant that for me, like I kind of just expected, like, you know, if I fail, I fail. Like no one can hold this over me. And therefore, I'm just going to go in. I'm going to do the fucking best job I can. And hopefully it works. And if not, then there's nothing else I could have done. So I like that, just because it wasn't like, oh shit, what corner have I put myself into? It's just do the best job you can and plan ahead so nothing can go wrong. And let's just pray that it works. So I remember going back to my hotel that night. I came back in the morning and I'm expecting them to be like, oh yeah, these suck, and it failed. But it was just like, it all looked great, because I hadn't even seen the stuff I'd done, but there's no time.
Because
you're literally hitting a button and generating all this stuff from scratch. So I'd never actually seen any of the stuff. And Michael Bay approved it on the spot. And,
thank goodness.
So it was cool, because that was something where I was cornered with like, how the hell am I going to pull this off? But luckily it wasn't one where I'm like, shit, I'm so stressed and strung out. It was just like, have a plan, stick to it, and anticipate problems as they come up, and hope for the best, I guess.
Yeah, that's good advice. All right. That's a great story. I've had so many of those. I just am getting flashbacks of my own agency years of the crap hitting the fan, and I've got to figure out how to clean up the mess, and I have no time to do it. It's traumatic. All right. You've had 300 episodes on your podcast. Most of them have been guests coming in. Give me 3 or 4 things that are like standout lessons that you learned from all of these guests that you've had come on.
I will say, like, one of my favorite guests was Louis Castle. He's the head of Amazon Studios up in Seattle. And I selfishly wanted him on because I used to play the video game Command and Conquer back in the day. And it kind of had a big kind of impact on me why I got into 3D, because I love the pre-rendered cinematics and everything. I was starting to get into 3D, and seeing that stuff was a big deal. So the first email I ever sent in my entire life was actually to Westwood Studios in Vegas, saying to tech support, saying, hi, I'm a 3D artist. I'm like 14 or something. Can I have the 3D models for rendered cinematics? And they actually replied saying, I wish we could. I don't have access, and I don't think we're allowed. But Louis Castle is one of the founders, and I reached out to him expecting to nerd out about Command and Conquer. And that actually ended up being a really impactful episode of me, just kind of talking about him and his whole career as like being an artist back in the 80s. But then growing and building a business, which Richard Branson bought out. And his whole story about Branson was really funny as well. I felt like I learned a lot from that call, and also connected with him. And I want to maintain that relationship. So at least that meant a lot to me. And I guess I'd recommend anyone go and listen to that one again. I did just recently have Glenn Stearns from Undercover Billionaire. We were just chatting about this before the call. And this is something that you mentioned earlier that kind of reminded me of it as well, is that he mentioned in 2007, 2008, during the recession, that's when his whole company went to crap. And that was a chance for him to kind of just quickly grab everyone's money and kind of take himself out of the hole they buried himself in. But instead what he did, and this is why I wanted to reach out to him in the first place, was just he seemed like such a genuine person that people believed in. And what he ended up doing is he contacted every single person, like every single one of his clients. And he's like, hey, because he's at the time I think he was doing real estate. And he basically was just saying, this is the situation we're in, and just being completely transparent, completely open, and saying, you can either stick with me or you can take your money back. You know, I'm happy to work with you either way. And just tell me what you want. And I just want to tell you where we're at. And most people wouldn't have done that. And just recently with COVID and everything, there are certain people, even on the second season of the same show that I'm mentioning, that did the complete opposite, where it's just like, I'm shutting you out of your own money, and I'm taking care of myself first. And that to me is just, again, it's just such an amazing example of leadership, where it's about being transparent, being approachable, being all the things that we've talked about. because it means that people then know where they stand and they can trust you rather than feeling like, they've got to, keep a close eye on like what you're doing because you're going to be looking out for yourself. Yeah. So that to me kind of stood out quite a lot. Yeah, in general, I'm just really grateful. One thing I told you is like, if you'd ask me my favorable guests, you'd be my top 3. And I think also Lewis Castle and Glenn Stearns actually, which coincidentally, they both knew Branson. Glenn owned an island with Branson.
Oh,
so
it's crazy.
You got to make that connection too. And then you're the trio.
I got to own an island. I got to get myself an island sometime.
Well, I'll quickly say this. Like one story that did stick out is Genie Santos. She's one of the supervisors at Pixar. She told me about her job interview at Pixar like 30 years ago or something, how she goes in, it's like her first job or something. And the person interviewing her is like, oh yeah, like, have you met Steve? I'll go get Steve. And she's like, no, it's fine. Steve Jobs comes in, sits down with her and starts to give her this metaphorical lecture about the pot plant that was on the desk, about you're kind of like this pot plant and we want to help you grow into a big tree and blossom and all these things. And this is such a surreal kind of weird conversation to be having with Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
And it's your first job interview in your entire life.
I think the world is so much smaller than what people originally think. So here is Allan, who grew up in a crack house in Brisbane. And then he's sitting, getting his work approved by Michael Bay and working with Robert Zemeckis and doing these amazing movies. And if you didn't have vision and passion, there's no way that that's ever going to happen. But it's feasible for people in the world that we live in now, with the ability to connect with people all over the world. You can literally live anywhere in the world and have the dream of someday maybe doing a project for Disney, or which is like a lot of people's dream in life. They want to do something for Disney. I want to work for Disney. And it's not out of the realm of possibility. There are a lot of people in the Philippines. Disney has studios in the Philippines to do all their direct to DVD types of cartoons and things that they used to do. So I think one of my takeaways in this conversation is that don't be afraid to dream bigger, because it's actually attainable. You have the ability to connect with people. You have the ability to email. You've got it all over your site. Ask me a question, reach out, and people can message you right now. And then they're 1 degree removed from all of these great people that you have contact with and relationships with. They're connected to you. You're open for connections. And then they're 1 degree removed. It's so feasible to go and accomplish whatever you set your mind out to go and accomplish today.
I love that. It's so true, and yet people make excuses for it, and it drives me nuts. Glenn, actually, that's one thing I asked him, Glenn Stearns, was why don't you think other people take the initiative when you see these opportunities everywhere and they're like waiting for their opportunity of a lifetime to come along? And he mentioned that, like, how frustrated he was that that other people don't see all these opportunities and he does. Yeah. And he doesn't get it. Like, he's still to this day frustrated by that. Two things I'll quickly say though is one, I've never said the crack house thing out loud. I've almost alluded to it about 100 times. I
hate to phrase it that way, but it was for dramatic effect.
No, I totally get it. It's just funny because I so wrestle with that because to me it was just like growing up, it was like whatever. It's like, oh yeah, there's a lot of tough times, because even then there's like so much more worse shit that kind of happened during that time. But it's kind of stuff that like my wife knows and nobody else. I will say, I remember telling my uncle once we're having a beer and I mentioned that this guy came in with a gun and tried to kill everyone in the house. And he was just kind of like looked at me like, sure he did, Allan. And then like 20 minutes later, my mom arrived and she was coming to say hi. And I was like, remember when the guy came with a gun and tried to kill all of us? And she's like, oh yeah, John Walker, blah, 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 blah. So this is like one of those validation points of like, see, I'm not crazy. But the other thing, like just as an example, like a really dumb example of like reaching out, I won't say who it is, but there was someone who was at the premiere with Marvel for Avengers Endgame, and they were posting all over social media that they're at the premiere and it's a very important person. And I recognized someone who was standing next to them that follows me on Instagram. And just one of those moments of like, well, I want to connect with this person. So I'd never actually spoken to the other person. I just knew that he followed me. So I just kind of messaged him. I'm like, hey man, like, I love your work and I just want to reach out. How's it going? Blah, blah, blah. And that's pretty much all I did. But knowing that he's, follows me and also is staying next to this other guy,
Yeah.
kind of just three-dimensional chess, not very complicated. It's like one-step chess really, but knowing that he would then be like, oh shit, Allan messaged me, blah, blah, blah. Allan does all the stuff and tell the other person. So then 30 minutes later, that person's now following me. It's that easy to be able to connect with people where it's like, oh, so-and-so, and, you don't need to go in transactionally. Like, I'm doing it more of like a what if. I'll message this person to see what happens. But you've got the power to make anyone's pocket vibrate, these days. And that means that, someone might have 20 gatekeepers for email, for phone, but then on their Twitter or Instagram, wherever they got the lowest following, you can go in there and hit them up and, they're going to respond. Like it's amazing. And you can build any relationship you want. Yeah.
It was interesting. I just did that exercise with somebody that I coach, and her agency does a lot of social impact work. And I was like, okay, well, let's look on LinkedIn on people that you can connect with. And it was like the C-level person over Microsoft's social impact ventures. And he had posted some things on LinkedIn, and there were like 2 comments. And I was saying, look, you can comment on this, and you're 1 out of the 3 comments on his post. He's going to see you there.
That's right.
And recognize you because you're not buried inside of the thousands. So I think that's great advice. Find the social media that they have the least amount of connections on, and you stand a much better chance of being noticed.
Here's another hack that I've never heard anyone say before, but on Instagram, you can see everyone's hashtags they follow. And the funny thing is, like, if you message them, then it might show up in the message requests or whatever, and so they never see it. If you comment, maybe they're getting a bazillion comments, but maybe there's a hashtag in there that they follow that has like nobody posting to it. And if you start attacking that hashtag, that's going to show up in their feed, and it's just a chance to get their attention. And it really is that. It's just, how can I get attention of busy people, and then how can you leverage that? And again, as we both know, the secret is not to go in trying to say, gimme. It's about how can I build a really kind of trustworthy, honest relationship with them by offering value or
exactly offering value back to them. And that's such a huge one. I look at the people that I'm connected with most on social media, and the ones who message me and say, oh, Mike, your live was awesome. Thanks so much. That has so much value to me. Mm-hmm. Hey, I can't wait for your live tomorrow, because they signed up to watch it. Those people have so much value to me because it's validation and it's support. And so before you go and ask me for work, or ask Allan, hey, Allan, can I work on the next Transformers movie with you? Go in and provide value to Allan and support him in some way. Listen to his content, comment on his posts, provide value of the things that he can benefit from, and you stand a much better chance of him returning value to you at some point in the future.
100%. And the more you do that, the more that you're going to start recognizing those certain names that keep popping up. And then when you message them, they're going to be like, oh yeah, there's so-and-so, she's been messaging me a bunch, or he's been messaging me a lot. And like, that's just it. Like, everyone's accessible now. It's not constrained to one country.
Yep. It's really good. All right. Well, what's your last little gem of advice that you want to drop to your listeners that you don't get a chance to in your normal podcast episodes?
I think at the beginning, like episode 1, I always hated this phrase, but it just seemed to be so true, was you got to be in it to win it. In other words, if you want to do something but you never try, then of course you're never going to succeed. But, it's more the what if. Like, by trying, it means that at least there's a 50% chance you're going to succeed and 50% chance you're going to fail. So I think that it's more about creating opportunities everywhere you can, just by putting in the work. But I think that these days, knowing my audience a lot better, I think it's, first of all, relationships are everything and way more important than the work or anything else. But on top of that, I think that failure is the thing that most people are so afraid of ever experiencing failure, rather than seeing failure as part of the process, that they never try in the first place. So it's knowing more of the problem now. It's not so much about, well, you got to try to win. It's more understanding that like most people are so paralyzed by like the what if I fail that they never try in the first place. And the truth is that you're going to fail a lot, but that's where I feel like most people's interpretation of failure is that it's a bad thing. You know, it's the same way with like negotiating. There's a book I love called Negotiating Starts with No, because it just puts it in context. It's just like once you say no, it's like that's when you can start discussing, well, how do I move this to a yes? And usually it's about understanding their needs, their wants, and then you'll get everything you want once you can address that. But with failure, if you're seeing failure as, well, if I fail, it's the end of the world, instead of like, okay, if I fail, then that's data for me to say, okay, now I have a result, now I have another, now I have another, now I can start to move more to a positive opposed to a negative. That interpretation, I think, changes everyone's perspective. And most people, unfortunately, see it as like, you know, if I fail, it's the end of the world. So they're so focused on that, and it's so crippling to them if they do experience it, rather than it being a stepping stone.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Great advice to leave on in this episode number 300 of the Allan McKay Podcast, with our esteemed guest, Allan McKay. Thank you for being on the show today, Allan. Where can people find you and connect?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm so grateful that you decided to do this, knowing how busy you are. And again,
good, man. I love doing these things.
You know, I'm sure there would have been a 2 or a 3 or a 4th person, but you were the guy I went to.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, AllanMcKay.com, or I don't want to sound pretentious with, you know, Google Allan McKay, but knowing that there's so many different platforms these days, it's usually the easiest way to find things.
I Googled Allan McKay. I found Allan McKay on IMDb. I found Allan McKay on Wikipedia. I found Allan McKay on AllanMcKay.com. And I found Allan McKay and his 44,000 followers on YouTube. He's also on Instagram. You're giving so much to the VFX community and to the creative entrepreneur community as well. So kudos to you, man, for all you do. I know you are appreciated by so many different people, and we're really grateful to have you on the Allan McKay Podcast today. Thank you.
So meta. No, thank you so much, man. I'm really grateful.
All right.
Okay, what do you think? Thanks for watching. I hope you got a lot from this. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. I would love to hear from you. I also mentioned this earlier, but right now I just released a free course on how to raise your prices as an artist, how to attract your dream clients, as well as how to do your side hustle. I've been in the industry for 25 plus years, both as an artist, as well as a manager, hiring artists and managing them, paying them, so I'm very familiar with this topic. And for me, it's a pet peeve that artists use the excuse that there's no money in art, or art doesn't pay, art's not a real career. I want to eliminate the starving artist mindset for good. So that's why I want to share with you 8 hours of training, everything I know about how to price yourself and raise your rates and get what you deserve, as well as building your side hustle as well as an artist. So that way you can leverage your talents to be able to sell assets, be able to do NFTs, everything else in between. So lots to dive into. Check it out, pricingclass.com, or click the link below the video. You can check it out there. Thanks again for watching. So that's it from me. By the way, it would mean the world to me if you could like and subscribe to this channel, as well as share this video, because I would love to keep making more content for you. I appreciate you, and I look forward to continuing to serve you on your journey to success as an artist. I'm Allan McKay, and thanks for watching.